Your pork goes bad in days. 3, maybe 4, if your fridge is doing its job. But in ancient Rome, pork didn't just last longer. It could last months, sometimes even years. No refrigeration, no plastic packaging, no use-by label. So here's the real question. How did people 2,000 years ago preserve meat better than we do today? And what did the Romans know about preserving that modern kitchens have forgotten? Because here's the thing. You have technology they couldn't dream of. Cold chains, vacuum seals, chemical preservatives with names you can't pronounce. And your meat still rots in less than a week. They had salt, smoke, thyme, and meat that could survive a 6-month sea voyage. Before we go deeper, quick question. Have you ever opened your fridge, smelled meat that should have been fine, and thought, how did this already rot? Let us know in the comments. How do you tackle this problem? Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, but only if you really liked it and want to see more of this. Pork was Rome's survival meat. Let's get one thing straight. The Romans didn't treat pork like a weekend barbecue. They treated it like infrastructure, like roads, like aqueducts, like something the empire literally ran on, and there's a reason for that. Roman agricultural writers like Varro weren't philosophers sitting in towers. These were practical men who ran farms and fed armies. And Varro said something that modern nutritionists have somehow forgotten. The pig is the most efficient animal for feeding people. Think about it. A cow takes years to mature. It needs pastures. It needs labor. And when it's done working your fields, it's tough and stringy. A sheep gives you wool and milk, so you keep it alive as long as possible. A goat eats everything and gives you almost nothing in return. But a pig? A pig grows fast. A pig eats scraps, waste, anything you throw at it. And a pig converts all of that into one thing, meat. Massive amounts of usable, storable, life-sustaining meat. A single sow can produce 8 piglets per litre, sometimes 12, twice a year. Do the math. That's not animal husbandry. That's a protein factory. And the Romans knew it. Pigs weren't kept for labour. They weren't kept for leather or wool. They were kept for one purpose, protein storage on legs. Now here's where modern assumptions fall apart. For decades, scholars believed ordinary Romans lived on grain and little else. Bread and porridge. Maybe some cheese if they were lucky. Meat was for the rich, for banquets, for sacrificial festivals. But the science says otherwise. Archaeologists have run stable isotope tests on bones from Roman Britain. Not emperors, not senators. Ordinary people buried in ordinary graves. And the results are clear. These people were eating substantial animal protein, pork, chicken, fish. This wasn't rare food saved for special occasions. This was routine fuel. At Cirencester, a major Roman town, the nitrogen isotope levels in human bones proved that meat wasn't a luxury. It was lunch. Even more surprising? A small rural farming community called Stanton Harcourt showed higher animal protein consumption than the cities. Farmers were eating more meat than townspeople. This wasn't the grain-based near-vegan diet that historians assumed. This was a meat-eating society. But here's the catch. A pig produces far more meat than a family can eat in a few days. An 8-month-old pig, dressed out, gives you 50 kilograms of usable product. That's 4 to 5 times more than a sheep or goat. You can't eat 50 kilograms before it rots. So Rome had to solve a problem that modern people forgot how to solve. How do you make meat last? Not for days, for months, for years, and they figured it out. But salt alone wasn't enough. Salt was Rome's refrigeration. The Romans didn't have freezers, they didn't have vacuum seals, they didn't have cold chains or refrigerated trucks. What they had was salt, and they understood something fundamental that modern food science has buried under layers of plastic and marketing. Bacteria can't survive without water. Starve them of moisture and they die. This wasn't folk wisdom passed down through guesswork. This was documented technology. Roman agricultural writers recorded detailed curing methods with the same precision they used for aqueduct engineering. Cato the Elder, writing in the 2nd century BC, didn't just mention salt curing. He gave step-by-step instructions. Pack the hams in salt, press it into every surface, leave them for 12 days, remove them, brush off the old salt, apply fresh salt, hang them in a place with good airflow, let them dry. This wasn't a recipe, this was a protocol. And Roman households followed it the same way they followed instructions for building walls or planting crops. Because salt wasn't seasoning, salt was a weapon. Here's what happens at the molecular level. When you pack meat in coarse salt, osmosis begins immediately. Water inside the muscle cells gets pulled toward the salt crystals on the surface. The cells shrink. Liquid drains out, carrying blood, nutrients, and the bacteria that feed on them. Over 7 days, the meat loses 15% of its weight. All of it water. All of it gone. But the Romans didn't stop there. After the first salting, they scraped off the wet, bloody salt and applied fresh, dry crystals. Then they did it again. By the third round, the meat was firm, dark red, and dry to the touch. Modern scientists call this water activity. It's a scale from 0 to 1, measuring how much moisture is available for bacteria to use. Fresh meat sits at 0.98. That's paradise for pathogens. Salmonella thrives. E. coli multiplies. Listeria spreads. But heavily salted Roman pork, it dropped to 0.85 or lower. At that level, nothing grows. Not bacteria, not mold, not yeast. Modern tests prove this works. Researchers following Cato's methods produced preserved pork that remained stable for months without refrigeration. The salt didn't just slow decay, it made the meat chemically hostile to life. Now watch what happens once that moisture is gone. The pork transforms. It's no longer soft, wet, and welcoming. It becomes a biological desert. Microbes land on the surface and find nothing to eat, nothing to drink, nowhere to survive. That's how you get meat that lasts. Not through chemicals, not through cold, through salt, but salting was only step one. Dry curing turned pork into stored wealth. The real Roman breakthrough was what came next: dry curing. Columella, writing in the 1st century AD, didn't just tell farmers to salt their pork and hope for the best. He described a precise, multi-stage process that transformed raw meat into something that could outlast seasons. First, the pig was butchered and boned. Then salt was rubbed over every surface, pressed into every cavity where bone used to be. But here's where it gets serious. The meat was placed between weighted boards and pressed for 3 days. Why? To force moisture from deep inside the muscle fibers, places salt alone couldn't reach fast enough. After pressing, the pork was rubbed again with salt and a small amount of saltpeter, then again and again. For 9 to 12 days, the meat was worked and reworked until the surface felt dry and firm. Only then was it rinsed and hung to dry. This is where it gets interesting. Dry curing doesn't just preserve meat, it transforms it. The muscle fibers tighten, the fat becomes translucent. The color deepens to a rich, dark red. The texture changes from soft and perishable to dense and stable. At the molecular level, something remarkable happens. The combination of salt, pressure, and time doesn't just remove water. It restructures the meat itself. Proteins bind together. Enzymes break down slowly over weeks and months, developing complex flavors that fresh meat can never have. The pork becomes chemically stable, not through artificial additives, through physics and patience. The science backs up what Columella described. Researchers following Roman protocols have produced cured pork that remains safe and edible for months at room temperature. The preservation effect is identical to what you see in traditional prosciutto today. And that's not a coincidence. Prosciutto makers in Parma are still using methods that trace directly back to Roman Italy. 2,000 years of refinement, but the core process is the same: salt, pressure, air, time. In Rome, a properly cured ham wasn't just dinner, it was stored wealth. Think about what that means. A farmer could slaughter a pig in autumn, cure the meat through winter, and still be eating from that same animal the following summer. He could trade cured hams for goods. He could ration them through lean months when fresh food was scarce. This was long-term food security in a world without electricity. A cured ham hanging in a Roman cellar wasn't a luxury, it was insurance. It was money you could eat. And it worked because they understood something we've forgotten. Preserved meat isn't just food that lasts longer, it's food that works harder. But even that wasn't enough. The Romans added another layer. Smoke was a second wall of defense. Salt pulled the water out. Drying stabilized the meat. But the Romans didn't stop there. They added smoke. Not for flavor. Not for that artisanal barbecue taste modern food marketers love to sell you. Smoke was a weapon, a chemical barrier, a second wall of defense against decay. Roman records and archaeological evidence show that smoking was widely used after curing. Once the meat had been salted and dried, it was hung in smokehouses, where slow-burning wood released invisible compounds that settled on every surface. Here's what smoke actually does. When wood burns at low temperatures, it doesn't just make heat, it makes chemistry. The wood breaks down through a process called pyrolysis, releasing hundreds of different compounds into the air. The most important are phenols and organic acids. Phenols come from lignin, the tough polymer that gives wood its structure. When lignin breaks apart, it releases chemicals like guaiacol and syringol. These aren't just flavor molecules, they're disinfectants. The same compounds show up in hospital antiseptics and antibacterial mouthwash. When phenolic smoke touches the surface of cured meat, it doesn't bounce off, it sticks. It reacts with the proteins on the surface and forms a thin, tough layer called a pellicle. This pellicle is armor. It locks in the remaining moisture, it locks out oxygen, it locks out airborne bacteria looking for somewhere to land and multiply. But the phenols do something else. They penetrate deeper into the meat and attach to fat molecules. Fat normally goes rancid when it reacts with oxygen. That's the sour, spoiled smell you recognize from meat that's turned. Phenols block this reaction. They neutralize the chemistry of decay before it can start. That's why a 2-year-old smoked ham doesn't smell like rotten fat. The smoke built a chemical shield around every molecule that could spoil. Then there's the acid. Smoke contains acetic acid, the same compound found in vinegar. When this acid settles on the meat's surface, it lowers the pH to around 5.0. Bacteria can't survive in acid. Their enzymes stop working, their cell membranes break down, so the Romans built preservation in layers. Salt removes water. Drying stabilizes the meat. Smoke seals it. Each layer alone might slow bacteria down. Together they create a fortress nothing can penetrate. Modern tests prove it. Researchers following ancient smoking methods produced cured pork that lasted dramatically longer than untreated meat. Months longer. No modern technology required. But here's the catch. Romans weren't preserving meat for Instagram photos of charcuterie boards. They were preserving it for survival. Every cut, every piece. Sausage was Rome's leftover technology. So you've salted the hams, you've smoked the belly, you've hung the shoulders to dry. But what about the rest? The scraps, the trimmings, the odd pieces that don't fit neatly on a hook. The Romans had an answer: sausage, a system for turning every last scrap of a slaughtered pig into preserved, portable, durable food. Roman texts describe the process in detail. Minced meat mixed with fat, seasoned with salt and spices, then stuffed into cleaned intestinal casings. The casings were tied off, hung up, and left to cure. The result was compact protein that could last for months. Think about what sausage actually solves. You have irregular cuts of meat, bits of fat, pieces too small to salt and hang individually. Alone, these scraps would rot in days. But minced together, packed with salt and sealed inside a casing, they become shelf-stable food. The fat content is critical here. Fat coats the bits of meat in a protective layer that keeps bacteria away. Salt draws out moisture and creates a hostile environment for microbes. The casing seals everything inside, limiting oxygen exposure. It's the same hurdle effect that made hams last, multiple barriers working together. Roman agricultural writers like Varro mention sausages as common household products. Apicius, the famous Roman cookbook, includes recipes for Lucaniki, a smoked sausage from the Lucania region. These weren't delicacies for emperors. They were everyday food for soldiers, workers, and families. The science backs up the ancient texts. Researchers recreating ancient methods produced sausages stable for months. No fridge required. The process works because it respects the same principles as ham curing. Remove water, add salt, limit oxygen, let time do the rest. But sausage offered something hams couldn't: efficiency. A ham requires a specific cut. A sausage requires only meat. Any meat. Every piece of the pig that couldn't be preserved another way went into the grinder. Nothing was wasted, and the result was food that could travel. Soldiers carried sausages on campaigns across Europe. Merchants traded them in markets hundreds of miles from where the pig was slaughtered. Families rationed them through winters when fresh meat was impossible. Now compare that to today. Modern households throw away more pork in a single week than a Roman family could afford in a year. We buy pre-packaged cuts, use half, forget the rest in the back of the fridge, and toss it when the smell hits. Why your pork rots faster today? The Romans wasted nothing. We waste everything. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Modern meat isn't built to last. It's built to sell fresh. And those are two completely different engineering goals. Think about how pork reaches your kitchen today. A pig is slaughtered at an industrial facility. Within hours, the meat is cut, packaged, and loaded onto refrigerated trucks. It travels through a cold chain of warehouses and distribution centers, always kept at exactly 40 degrees. It arrives at your supermarket, sits in a refrigerated case, and waits for you to buy it. The entire system depends on one thing: unbroken cold. Cut the power anywhere along that chain, and the clock starts ticking. Your pork has maybe 4 days before bacteria take over. Maybe less if the fridge fluctuates. Maybe less if the packaging was compromised. Maybe less if the meat sat too long before you bought it. And the industry knows this. That's why they inject pork with water and phosphates. Plump, wet meat looks fresher on the shelf. It weighs more at the register. The fact that all that added moisture creates a paradise for bacteria, that's your problem once you swipe your card. Rome had a different philosophy. Romans expected meat to survive heat. They expected it to travel hundreds of miles on wooden carts and sailing ships. They expected it to last through winters, sieges, and famines. They expected it to feed armies marching across continents. No cold chain, just meat that was built to endure. And it worked because they built preservation into the process from the moment the pig was slaughtered. Salt to remove water, pressing to squeeze out moisture, drying to stabilize, smoking to seal. Every step pushed the meat further from decay and closer to permanence. We do the opposite. We build convenience instead of durability. We build systems that require constant electricity, constant transportation, constant infrastructure. And when any part of that system fails, our food dies with it. The difference isn't that Romans had magic. They didn't have secret techniques lost to history. The difference is priorities. They prioritized survival. We prioritized speed. They built food that could outlast winter. We build food that barely outlasts the week. So when you open your fridge and smell that sour rot, don't blame the meat. Blame the system that designed it to expire. The Romans solved this problem 2,000 years ago. We just forgot the answer. So the next time your pork expires in your fridge after only a few days, remember this. 2,000 years ago, Romans were eating meat preserved through nothing but salt, air, and smoke. No electricity, no plastic, no cold chain keeping everything alive. They understood bacteria before microscopes existed. They understood moisture was the enemy. And they treated pork like a resource that had to endure, not a product designed to expire. We forgot what they knew. We traded resilience for convenience, and now we throw away meat that a Roman soldier would have carried across an empire. Now I want to ask you, would you actually try Roman-style curing if you had the chance? Or does modern refrigeration feel too convenient to give up? Drop your answer in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.